Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins.
The banners of Gondor stirred gently in the evening wind, their white tree gleaming silver in the fading sun. From the high walls of Minas Tirith, the city looked peaceful. White towers glinting, bells echoing faintly down the winding streets. Yet beneath that calm lay a murmur of unease. Rumors had begun to creep in from the east, whispers of strange lights in the mountains, of travelers vanishing on lonely roads, and of voices carried by the night wind that were neither man's nor beasts. King Elisar, the reunited realm's wise ruler, sat in quiet council with his captains. His face, though noble and fair, bore the weight of many cares. "Peace is hard won," he said softly, "but fragile as glass. We must guard it, or it will shatter in our hands." His words fell into silence, and the flicker of torchlight cast long shadows across the marble floor. It was then that Captain Dareth of Ithilien stepped forward. He was a grizzled soldier, his hair touched with gray, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "My king," he said, "the outpost at Halrock Keep has gone dark. No riders return, no beacon burns. We sent a patrol, they vanished as well." Elisar's gaze turned toward the east, where the black line of the Duath, the mountains of shadow, loomed faint and far. "We cannot let fear take root again," he said. "Send me men you trust." At his command, a company was chosen, 20 knights of Gondor, each sworn to defend the White City with their lives. Among them was Sir Halion, youngest of the captains, son of a smith from Losarnak. Though his years were few, his courage had been proven in the War of the Ring, when he stood with Faramir's men at the defense of Osgiliath. He carried a plain sword, but the light of determination burned in his eyes. As they prepared to depart, Halion met with Linnale, a healer from the woods of Ithilien. Her voice was soft as leaves in the wind, her hair the pale gold of morning. She had tended the wounded during the war, and was said to have studied under the elves of Rivendell for a time. Though not a warrior, she insisted on joining them. "Where shadows linger, wounds will follow," she said. "And if this darkness touches men's hearts, they will need more than steel." So it was that on a gray dawn, the company rode out from Minas Tirith. Hooves echoed on the stone bridge that spanned the Anduin, and the white city dwindled behind them like a dream fading into mist. The road led through the green lands of the Pelennor, now healed of battle scars, and then eastward into the wilds of Ithilien, that fair country of fragrant woods, clear streams, and hidden glades. For several days they rode in peace. Birds sang and sunlight dappled the forest floor. Yet as they drew nearer the mountains, a chill crept into the air. The trees grew darker, their branches twisting overhead like grasping fingers. The songs of birds fell silent, and even the wind seemed to whisper warnings. At dusk, on the 5th day, they reached the valley where Halrock Keep should have stood. What they found chilled them to the bone. The fort lay in ruin, its gate torn down, its walls blackened by fire. No bodies remained, only the marks of battle, shattered shields, broken blades, and a banner half buried in the ash. Dareth knelt beside the remains of the gate and frowned. "No orc work, this," he muttered. "Too clean, too deliberate." Halion walked the empty courtyard, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The silence was heavy, like a held breath. "There was fear here," he said softly. They fought, but against what? That night they made camp outside the ruined walls. A thin moon hung over the dark ridges of the mountains, and the men spoke little. Halion took the first watch. As he stood by the fire, his eyes caught a flicker, a glimmer of light far off among the trees. It was faint, like a lantern's glow moving slowly through the darkness. He called Dareth, and together they watched. The light drifted closer, then halted, hovering, pulsing like a living thing, and faintly on the night wind came a whisper. It was a voice, low and sorrowful, speaking in a tongue Halion did not know. Back from the edge, Linnell warned quietly. She'd come up behind them, her face pale in the firelight. That is no lantern. There are spirits here, remnants of those who served the shadow. They hunger for the living. Before they could reply, the light flared bright white and vanished. The forest fell still. Even the crickets had ceased their song. Halion exhaled slowly, gripping his sword. Tomorrow, he said, we search the woods. Whatever haunts this place, we will find it. Linnell nodded, but did not look reassured. Be wary, Captain. Not all enemies wear flesh. At dawn, they entered the trees, their boots sinking into soft earth. Mist wound among the roots, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. As they pressed deeper, they found strange signs. Runes carved into stone, circles burned into the ground, and fragments of armor blackened with soot. Then they came upon something worse. The remains of a man bound to a tree, his armor marked with the seal of Gondor. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Around his neck hung a piece of dark metal, sharp-edged and cold, even in the morning sun. Halion reached out, but Linnell caught his hand. Do not touch it, she said. That metal bears evil memory. Dareth drew his sword. We should bring word to the king, he said. This is no simple raid. Someone is calling the darkness back. Halion looked toward the east, where the peaks of the Ephel Duath rose like broken teeth against the sky. A shadow seemed to move among them, vast and patient. Then we ride east, he said grimly. If a hand still works the will of Mordor, we must cut it off before it strikes again. And so, beneath the gray clouds of morning, the knights of Gondor rode onward, toward the mountains, and the unseen shadow that waited beyond. Morning came pale and cold, shrouding the woods of Ithilien in ghostly mist. The knights broke camp in silence, each man glancing often toward the mountains that loomed like the teeth of some ancient beast. Even the horses were uneasy, stamping and tossing their heads as if they too could sense the wrongness in the air. Sir Halion led the company forward, his eyes keen and wary. They moved through the forest single file, weapons ready, the muffled thud of hooves dampened by moss and fallen leaves. The trees thickened, their trunks dark and gnarled, and the sunlight above became faint and green. Here and there stood remnants of ancient stonework, broken pillars, half-buried arches, relics of days when this land had been tended by Gondor's forefathers. Now ivy crept over the carvings, and silence ruled. As the day wore on, they found more signs of evil, blackened patches of ground where nothing grew and stones cracked by heat, though no fire burned there. At one such place, Linnell knelt, brushing her fingers through the ash. This was done by dark sorcery, she murmured. I can feel the taint lingering like smoke after a storm. Dareth frowned, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Then we draw near to the source. Halion gave a short nod. We press on until dusk. There must be a lair or stronghold nearby. They moved faster, driven by grim purpose. Near sunset, they came upon a narrow glen where a small stream ran red with rust from the rocks. Across it lay the ruins of a watchtower, ancient and half swallowed by vines. Once it had stood guard over the borders of Ithilien. Now only its lower walls remained, and its flagstones were cracked and overgrown. Yet the place still held a strange power. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of iron and rain. The company dismounted and entered cautiously. Birds scattered from the roofless walls, crying harshly. Inside they found a half-buried doorway leading down into darkness. A faint breath of cold air issued from below. Hallion drew his sword. "Torches," he said. When the flames were lit, the company descended, their shadows wavering on the rough stone walls. The stair wound deep into the earth until they reached a vaulted chamber, a place clearly of Gondorian craft, though long forsaken. At its center stood a black altar of polished stone. Upon it lay a single object, a shard of metal, dull and jagged, yet gleaming faintly in the torchlight like an ember of dying fire. No one spoke. The silence was thick as oil. Then Linnea whispered, "That is what called the spirits. It is a fragment of something old, older than this tower, older than Gondor itself." Hallion stepped closer, his brow furrowed. Could it be of the enemy? Before she could answer, a voice came from the shadows beyond the altar. "Indeed, young knight," it said, smooth and cold. "It is the remnant of a greater power, one your king would fear to name." Swords flashed up. From the darkness emerged a tall man clad in black mail. His hair was white as bone, his face pale and sharp. His eyes burned like coals beneath his hood. "I am Morlad, son of no house and servant of the true order of the world, and you, fools of the West, tread where you should not." Dareth took a step forward, his blade leveled. "You dare name yourself before the knights of Gondor?" Morlad smiled thinly. "Knights? No. Keepers of a dying flame. You think your white tree blooms forever? The roots of shadow run deeper than any king's pride." With a gesture, he raised his hand and the air rippled. A dark wind swept through the chamber, snuffing out half the torches. The shard upon the altar pulsed, sending forth a sickly glow. Hallion felt his mind reel. Whispers filled his ears, voices of despair and temptation. "Hold fast," he shouted. "Steady your hearts." Linnea thrust her staff toward the altar, speaking in the elvish tongue. A soft white light flared around her, pushing back the shadow. Morlad snarled, his eyes flashing with fury. "You would defy me, healer?" "Begone, servant of the Nameless," she cried. "Your master's power is broken." For a heartbeat, the chamber shook. Then Morlad's voice turned cruel and quiet. "Broken? No, little one, only sleeping." And with that he vanished in a gust of cold air, leaving behind a whisper that echoed through the stones. "Seek me if you dare, in the vale of Cirith Naur." The knights stood trembling, their torches flickering. Hallion sheathed his sword slowly. "He is no ghost," he said. "He is flesh, and plotting." Linnea sank to her knees, pale and shaken. "That shard must not remain here. Its malice will spread." So they wrapped the shard in linen and sealed it within an iron coffer, binding it with runes of warding. When they emerged from the ruins, the stars were out, cold and bright, above the dark line of the mountains. That night the company camped a short distance away. The men were uneasy, speaking little. Dareth kept his sword beside him as he sat by the fire, his eyes distant. "Cirith Naur," he muttered. "That name is not on any map I know.
"It lies in the southern folds of the Duath," Lineal said softly. "A hidden valley once used by Sauron's servants in secret rites. Few ever came back from it." Halion looked toward the east, where a faint red light flickered along the horizon as if some unseen forge burned beyond the mountains. "Then that is where we ride," he said. "We end this before it begins." Dareth turned to him sharply. "We are but a handful of men, and he commands sorcery. This is folly." Halion's gaze did not waver. "If we turn back now, he will grow stronger. The shadow feeds on delay. Gondor stands because men before us refuse to yield." For a long moment, Dareth said nothing. Then, with a grim sigh, he nodded. "So be it. East it is. But if this be our doom, let it be met with swords in hand." At dawn they rode again, the mist curling around them like ghosts. The shard's coffer was bound upon Halion's saddle, and wherever they passed, the air grew colder. The mountains rose higher, their peaks veiled in storm. Yet the young knight's heart did not falter. He thought of Minas Tirith gleaming in the sun, of the king's trust, and of the people who slept in peace, unaware of the peril that stirred beyond their borders. Hope is the light that endures when all else fails, his father had once told him. And so Halion rode on into shadow, carrying the last gleam of Gondor's hope with him. The road into the mountains was cruel and steep, winding like a serpent between cliffs of black stone. From the valleys below rose mists that clung to the riders' cloaks and chilled them to the bone. Their breath steamed in the dim air, and the clatter of hooves echoed endlessly among the rocks. Though it was still morning, the light was pale and uncertain, for the sun rarely touched these peaks. Sir Halion led the way, his eyes fixed upon the narrow trail that twisted ahead. Behind him rode Captain Dareth, silent and brooding, and beside them Lineal, wrapped in her gray cloak, her hood drawn low. The rest of the company followed close, 20 knights now reduced to 15, for sickness and unseen dread had claimed some already. The shard's coffer hung from Halion's saddle, bound with chains of iron and sealed in wax. Yet even so, the men said they could feel its presence. A faint pulse, like a heartbeat, or a whisper that pricked at the edge of thought. When they camped, none wished to sleep near it. As the days passed, the land grew ever more desolate. The trees thinned and withered, replaced by jagged stones and ash-gray soil. No birds sang here, and no streams flowed clear. In the distance, dark clouds gathered like bruises upon the sky. It was a country that seemed to remember evil, though the Dark Lord himself was long overthrown. On the fourth evening, as they made camp beneath a narrow ridge, Halion noticed Dareth sitting apart from the others. His face was drawn, and his eyes shone faintly in the firelight, restless and fevered. Halion approached and placed a hand upon his shoulder. "You have not spoken in 2 days," he said. "Does something trouble you?" Dareth's gaze flicked toward the coffer, then away again. "That thing," he muttered, "it speaks to me when I sleep. I hear the clash of swords, the cries of men, the call of the Black Gate. It promises power, and power to end fear forever." Halion's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Cast such thoughts aside, Captain. You are stronger than that." Dareth's lip curled. "Am I? Perhaps we all are but pawns of the same game. Perhaps we fight only to delay the darkness, not to end it." Before Halion could answer, Lineal approached, her staff glowing faintly at its tip. "The shard's corruption spreads like poison," she said. "We must reach Cirith now or soon, or even the purest hearts will falter." That night, Halion lay awake listening to the wind moan across the rocks. Somewhere in the dark, a whisper echoed, soft, mocking, familiar. You cannot prevail. The shadow knows your heart. He clenched his fists and turned away, but the voice lingered until dawn. When morning came, they rode on. The path narrowed until they were forced to go single file between cliffs that rose sheer on either side. It was then that the ambush came. Without warning, black shapes burst from the rocks above. Wild men of the east, their faces painted red and their eyes gleaming with madness. Arrows hissed down. One struck a rider beside Halion, felling him instantly. The knights wheeled their mounts, shields raised. To arms! Dareth roared, his sword flashing. The battle was fierce and close. The air filled with the clang of steel and the shouts of men. Halion cut down one foe then another, the taste of dust and blood in his mouth. Beside him, Linnea knelt beside the fallen, her hands shining with white light as she strove to heal. But the attackers were many, and their blows came swift. Dareth fought like a man possessed, his strength terrible to behold. When his blade struck, it left trails of shadow in the air, and his eyes burned with a strange, fierce light. "Dareth!" Halion cried, parrying a blow. "You are not yourself." The captain turned, his face twisted with fury. "Do not command me, boy. You think yourself a hero, yet you lead us to death." Before Halion could speak, Dareth charged forward, cutting down another foe with a cry that echoed off the cliffs. When at last the attackers fled, leaving their dead behind, the captain stood panting, his sword blackened as if by fire. Linnea approached him carefully. "The shard's voice has taken hold," she whispered. Dareth glared at her, his eyes wild. "Keep your witch's tongue behind your teeth. I fight better than I ever have. Perhaps the shard grants me strength." Halion stepped forward. "It grants nothing but ruin." "Give me your sword, Dareth. Rest now before you do harm." For a long moment, the older man's hand trembled on the hilt. Then with a snarl, he sheathed it and turned away. "I am no enemy of Gondor," he said coldly. "But mark me, Halion. The shadow is not so easily slain. You will see." They buried their dead beneath a cairn of stones before nightfall. The wind keened over the graves, and none spoke as they lit their campfire. Halion sat apart, staring into the flames. The faces of the fallen flickered before his eyes. Young men who had laughed in the sunlight only days before. Now their laughter was gone, swallowed by the dark. Linnea came to sit beside him, her voice soft. "You cannot bear their deaths alone, Halion. You lead them as best you can."
That is all any man can do. I gave them hope, he said bitterly, and hope led them here, to die among stones. She laid a hand upon his arm. No, hope is not the promise of safety. It is the strength to stand when safety is gone. He looked at her, and for a moment the heaviness lifted. "You speak as if you have seen the end of all things and still believe in the dawn." "I have," she said quietly, "and I do." The next day they reached the high pass, a narrow saddle between peaks, where the wind screamed like a living thing. Beyond lay the valley of Cirith Naur. Smoke rose from its depths, and the air smelled of ash and brimstone. The earth itself seemed wounded, seeping fumes from cracks that glowed faintly red. "There," Linnea said, pointing toward a dark structure half buried in the mountainside. "The Hall of Ashes. That is where Morlad will be." The knights dismounted, leading their horses down the treacherous path. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the shadow.
Halion could feel it pressing on his mind, urging him to turn back, to cast aside the burden, but he clenched his jaw and pressed on. When at last they reached the valley floor, they found the entrance. A wide arch carved in the likeness of a serpent's mouth. From within came a faint red glow, like the breath of a sleeping forge. Halion drew his sword, its blade shining faintly silver. "Whatever waits beyond," he said, "remember who you are. We are the Knights of Gondor. Our strength is in our fellowship and our faith." Dareth said nothing. His eyes flickered toward the coffer, and a shadow passed over his face. Together they stepped into the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the smell of burning stone. The walls glimmered faintly as though alive with hidden fire. At the far end stood Morlad, robed in black, the shard's twin clasped in his hand. He smiled when he saw them. "So you come at last," he said softly. "The heirs of a dying kingdom come to challenge eternity." Halion lifted his sword. "You will find Gondor's heart not so easily broken." Morlad raised his hand and the chamber trembled. "We shall see," he whispered, and the fire answered. Flame roared to life across the walls, running like liquid fire through the cracks of the stone. The knights staggered back, shielding their faces from the sudden heat. The hall of ashes blazed red and gold, and in its midst stood Morlad the Pale, tall, still, terrible in his calm. His eyes burned with the reflection of the flames, and in his hand the dark shard pulsed like a living heart. "Welcome, children of the West," he said, his voice carrying easily above the roar. "I have waited for you. Long have I dreamt of this hour, when the proud sons of Gondor would come crawling back into the shadow they thought destroyed." Halion stepped forward, his blade drawn. "You speak of shadows as if they were your birthright, but your master's reign is ended. The Dark Lord is gone, and his works are scattered." Morlad's lips curved in a faint smile. "Gone? No, knight, darkness cannot die. It seeps into stone, into memory, into the hearts of men. Tell me, how many of your company have already begun to hear its call?" He cast a glance toward Dareth, who stood a pace behind Halion, his hand trembling upon his sword. Dareth's eyes gleamed with a feverish light, and his breath came hard. "Enough words," Halion said. "You will answer for the blood you have spilled." "Will I?" Morlad lifted the shard in his hand, and its twin, bound in the iron coffer, began to throb in answer. The sound was not loud, yet it struck through the air like a pulse of thunder. Every man felt it, a deep vibration that clawed at the heart and filled the mind with whispers. Halion gritted his teeth, fighting the pull. Linnell's voice rose in elvish song, clear and bright, cutting through the shadow. She thrust her staff toward the coffer, and a soft white glow spilled from her hands, struggling to smother the shard's red gleam. Morlad hissed, his smile vanishing. "You dare to challenge me with the tongues of the Eldar?" He flung out his hand, and from the darkness sprang shapes. Wraiths forged from smoke and ash. Their forms were human only in outline, their faces nothing but hollow voids. They fell upon the knights, and the chamber filled with the clash of steel and the shriek of spirits. Halion met one head-on, his sword flashing. The blade passed through its shadowy form, yet the thing shrieked and drew back, its outline flickering like a dying flame. All around the men fought in terror, their swords ringing upon stone, their cries echoing in the vast hall. Linnell knelt, her face strained with effort as she poured her strength into the warding light. "Halion," she cried, You must destroy the shard. Both halves must be joined or broken. Halion turned, but at that moment Dareth lunged forward, his eyes blazing. No, it is mine. He struck the coffer with his sword, splitting it open. The bound shard burst free, leaping toward its twin like a spark seeking flame. The two pieces met with a flash of crimson fire, and the hall shook as though the mountain itself cried out. Halion was thrown to the ground, the breath driven from his lungs. He looked up to see Dareth standing before Morlad, his face alight with agony and ecstasy. "The power is mine now," he gasped. "I will end the fear. I will command it." Morlad laughed softly. "Foolish mortal. You were never meant to command it. You are but the vessel." He raised his hand, and Dareth screamed. The shard's light poured into him, consuming him from within. For a moment his body blazed like molten silver, and then he fell, lifeless, to the ground. The hall grew silent save for the crackle of fire. Halion forced himself to his feet. Rage and sorrow mingled in his heart. He stepped over Dareth's fallen form, raising his sword high. "Enough!" he cried. "Your evil ends here." Morlad turned toward him, his expression almost pitying. "You cannot slay what was forged from death itself." "Then I will die trying." With a cry, Halion charged. Their blades met with a clash that shook the chamber. Sparks flew, and for an instant the white fire of Gondor met the red flame of Mordor. Morlad's strength was terrible. Each blow rang like thunder, and his dark sword left trails of smoke in the air. Yet Halion did not yield. He fought as though the memory of every fallen comrade stood beside him. The knights who had perished on the road, the men who had died for Gondor's peace, and the captain who had fallen to the shadow. Morlad pressed him back, laughing. "You fight well, boy, but your light fades." Halion's sword slipped. Pain burned along his arm as the dark blade grazed him. His knees buckled, but before the killing stroke could fall, a cry rose behind him. Linnaeal's voice strong and clear. She stood with her staff raised, its light blazing brighter than before. "You will not have him," she shouted. With both hands, she struck the staff against the stone, and a wave of light burst forth, blinding in its purity. Morlad staggered, roaring in fury. The light wrapped around him, tearing at his form. "No! You cannot unmake me!" Linnaeal's voice shook with strain. "In the name of the West, by the grace of the Valor, be banished." There was a flash like lightning, and Morlad's scream filled the hall. His form dissolved into shadow and flame, drawn downward as though the earth itself swallowed him. Then came silence. The fires upon the walls guttered and died, leaving only the faint glow of Linnaeal's staff. Halion stumbled forward. "Linnaeal?" She was kneeling, pale as snow, her eyes closed. The staff lay broken beside her, its crystal dim. He fell to his knees beside her, lifting her gently. "I am here," she whispered faintly. "The darkness is gone."
"But the shard, it is spent, and so am I." "No," Halion said. "You cannot leave us now. Gondor still needs your light." She smiled weakly. "There is light enough in you, Halion. Carry it home." Her hand slipped from his, and her head bowed. The white glow faded. For a long time Halion knelt there, the silence pressing upon him like a weight. Around him the hall was still, its fires cold, its evil purged. Dareth lay fallen. The men stood in awe, their faces pale in the dim light. At last Halion rose, lifting Linnaeal's staff. "We return to Gondor," he said. "Her sacrifice shall not be forgotten." They carried her body from the Hall of Ashes and out into the dawn. For the first time in many days, the eastern sky was clear.
streaked with the faint gold of morning. The mountains seemed less dark, the wind less cruel. As they rode down into Ithilien, Halion looked once more toward the peaks behind them. The shadow had retreated, but he knew it was never truly gone. Still, he felt no fear. In his heart burned a light that no darkness could quench, the power of hope, as bright as the rising sun over the white city. The journey back through Ithilien was long and heavy with silence. The men rode slowly, bearing their wounded and the shrouded form of Linnea. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, and it seemed to Halion that the forest itself mourned. The sun broke through the clouds in fleeting rays, glinting upon their armor, and for a time the land looked almost fair again, as though it remembered peace. Yet in every man's heart there lingered the memory of fire and shadow. Halion rode at the head, his thoughts far away. The weight of leadership pressed upon him like iron. He had faced the darkness and lived, but the cost lay before him, pale and still beneath a white shroud. He could still hear Linnea's voice, calm, resolute, filled with a light that would not bow to fear. There is light enough in you, Halion. Carry it home. They made camp that night beneath the boughs of a ruined tower, one of Gondor's ancient watchposts, now overgrown with moss and ivy. The men spoke little as they tended their horses and set the fires. Only the crackle of flame and the soft murmur of the river filled the night. Halion sat apart, cleaning his sword. The blade was nicked and darkened, but when he held it to the light, the white sigil of the tree still gleamed faintly upon the steel. Dareth's body had been buried in the high pass before they began their descent. It had been a grim duty. The captain's fall weighed upon them all. A man once noble, undone by pride and the whispers of evil. Halion had spoken no words at his grave. The silence had said enough. Now, as the stars kindled above, Halion felt a presence near and looked up to see one of his men, Edric, a young knight from Lebanon, approaching with hesitant steps. "My lord," Edric said, bowing his head. "The men ask if we may hold a watch for her, for the Lady Linnea, that her spirit may find the straight road." Halion nodded. "Aye," he said, "light the torches. Let there be no darkness among us tonight." So they gathered in a circle, 15 men and one fallen healer. They set their torches in the earth around her bier, and the flames flickered high, casting long golden shadows upon the trees. Halion spoke then, his voice low but steady. "She came among us not for glory nor for war," he said, "but to heal and to give hope. When the shadow rose, she did not flee. When evil struck, she stood unshaken. Let her name be remembered in Gondor, not as a soldier, but as the light that guided us when all other lights went out." No man answered, yet their eyes shone with the reflection of the fire. Some bowed their heads, others raised their swords in silent salute. The night passed without fear, and when dawn came the air was still and clean. They buried her beneath a mound beside the river where white flowers grew among the stones. Halion placed her broken staff upon the grave, the crystal bound with silver thread. "Rest now," he said softly. "Your work is done." The next days were quiet. The company's wounds began to heal, and the road grew gentler as they left the highlands behind. The forests of Ithilien opened before them, green and fair, alive once more with birdsong. Yet Halion found little comfort in the beauty. The shadow of Morlad's words clung to his thoughts. Darkness cannot die. When they reached the plains of the Pelennor, the white city rose before them, gleaming beneath the sun like a crown of marble and silver. The sight stirred something deep in Hallion's chest. Pride and sorrow mingled. He had left that city full of resolve and returned with fewer men, bearing the memory of fire. At the great gate of Minas Tirith, the guards bowed low, their eyes widening at the sight of the wounded company. Messengers ran ahead to bear word to the king. Before long, trumpets sounded from the citadel, and King Elisar himself came forth, clad in mail and white mantle, his brow circled with a slender crown. Hallion dismounted and went to one knee before him. "My lord," he said, his voice hoarse, "the threat is ended. The servant of the shadow is no more, but we have lost good men, and the lady Lineal gave her life that Gondor might endure." Elisar's face was grave. He placed a hand upon Hallion's shoulder. "Rise, Sir Hallion. You and your company have done what few could. You have faced the darkness and returned to tell its tale. Gondor shall not forget." The king looked upon the weary faces of the knights. "You are all of one company now," he said. "Henceforth you shall be called the Knights of Hope, for where hope is kindled, shadow fails." At his words, the people who had gathered near the gate bowed their heads. Some wept, others cheered softly. The title passed among the men like a warm wind through cold air, and though they did not smile, they stood straighter. That night, in the Hall of Kings, a feast was held in honor of the fallen and the living alike. Music filled the air, though it was solemn rather than merry. Hallion sat beside the great hearth, the firelight flickering upon his armor. He spoke little, though many came to offer thanks. His thoughts were far beyond the walls, among the quiet hills of Ithilien, where a mound lay crowned with white flowers. Later, when the hall had grown still, Elisar came to sit beside him. "You are troubled," the king said. Hallion bowed his head. "The war is done, my lord, but the shadow still whispers in men's hearts. Dareth fell to it. Who among us may not do the same?" Elisar's gaze was distant, fixed upon the flames. "You speak truth. Darkness is not banished by swords alone, but neither is hope. You have seen both, Hallion, the peril and the light. Guard them well, and you will serve Gondor better than any blade." Hallion looked up. "Then my service is yours, until the end of my days." "So be it," said the king, and he smiled faintly. "Rest now, Knight of Hope. The white city stands, and the dawn is fair." The following morning, Hallion walked alone through the gardens that lay upon the sixth circle of the city. The air was cool, and the white blossoms of the malorn trees stirred in the breeze. He paused beside a small fountain, its waters bright in the morning sun, and laid a hand upon the hilt of his sword. For the first time since the shadow fell, he felt peace. Not the peace of forgetfulness, but of purpose fulfilled. The world was scarred but alive, and hope, fragile yet enduring, moved once more among the hearts of men. He looked eastward, toward the distant mountains where the clouds drifted low over the black peaks. "You were right, Lineal," he murmured. "There is light enough." And though no voice answered, the wind seemed to carry a whisper among the leaves, soft and clear, as a song long remembered. Seasons passed in Gondor, and though peace endured, it was a fragile peace, like morning dew upon the grass, bright yet fleeting. The White City thrived under the rule of King Elisar, and the lands of the reunited kingdom blossomed anew. Yet far beyond the fields and rivers, beneath the dark eaves of forgotten places, old whispers stirred once more. Sir Halion served faithfully in the guard of the tower, and his name became known among the captains. But he took little joy in praise. His heart remained ever mindful of those lost in Ithilien, of the fire that had taken them, and of the promise he had made to bear their hope home. He trained new squires and rode often along the borders, watching the east with wary eyes. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains of Mindalluin and the lamps of the city began to glow, Halion stood upon the high walls of the citadel. The wind from the east was chill, and he felt it against his scarred hand like the breath of something unseen. He had felt it before, faint and fleeting, a cold murmur that stirred the memory of the Hall of Ashes. A voice spoke behind him. "You sense it too." Halion turned and found Faramir, Prince of Ithilien, standing there in a cloak of green and silver. His eyes were grave, but kind as ever. "There are ill tidings," Faramir said quietly. "Travelers on the eastern road speak of firelight, seen at night among the ruins of Osgiliath, lights that move like living things." Halion's jaw tightened. The dead do not rest easily where darkness once ruled. "That is why I ask your aid," said Faramir. "We cannot send a great host, lest we rouse fear, but a small company, one that knows those shadows well, might uncover the truth." Halion bowed his head.
"Then I will go." By dawn the next day he rode from Minas Tirith with 6 companions, knights of hope, the same who had followed him into the mountains years before. They bore no banners, only the white tree upon their cloaks. The air was crisp with autumn, and the fields of Pelennor shimmered gold beneath the sun. Their road led eastward past the broken towers of the Ramas Ekor and the slow winding Anduin. For 2 days they rode in quiet strength, and the land seemed at peace. But when they reached the river crossing at Osgiliath, the light dimmed. The ancient city lay in ruin still, though green things grew among its stones. Great halls and bridges of marble, once the pride of Gondor, now stood broken, their reflection wavering upon the dark water. Mist drifted through the empty streets, and the wind whispered in the hollow arches like the ghosts of memory. Halion and his men crossed the bridge in silence, their footsteps echoing. The river below murmured faintly, carrying away the last gleam of day. As night fell, they made camp among the ruins of a great dome, its roof long fallen, its floor overgrown with ivy. A pale moon rose over the river, silvering the fragments of marble and the scattered remnants of war. The men spoke softly, their voices hushed by the weight of the place. Halion kept watch beside the fire, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The air was still yet heavy, as though waiting for something to stir. It came near midnight. A sound like distant weeping carried on the wind. One of the men, Baranor, lifted his head sharply. "Did you hear that?" Halion nodded. The sound grew clearer, not weeping, he realized, but singing, faint and sorrowful. It came from the eastern edge of the ruins, near the old quay. "Stay together," he said, rising. They moved quietly through the broken streets, their torches flickering. The song grew stronger, strange and haunting, and then they saw her, a figure standing upon the riverbank, robed in white, her face hidden by a veil. The moonlight glimmered on her hair, pale as snow. Halion called out, "Who walks here beneath the stars of Gondor?" The figure turned slowly. Her voice was soft as wind upon stone. "Do you not know me, Halion?" His heart faltered. For a moment he could not breathe. "Linnell." The men stared in awe, but she was changed. Her form shimmered faintly as though seen through a veil of water. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, now shone with sorrow. "I walk no longer in the world of the living," she said, "yet I cannot find peace. Something stirs beneath these ruins, a remnant of the power once awakened by the shards. It seeks to rise again." Halion stepped closer. "Then we will destroy it." "Tell us where it lies." She shook her head. "Beware, Halion. It does not take form as before. It feeds now upon despair, upon the hearts of men who have lost faith." Her voice trembled, and the light around her dimmed. "I cannot linger. The river calls me home." "Wait!" Halion cried, but even as he reached for her, her image wavered like mist. "Remember, Knight of Hope," she whispered, "the shadow's strength is not in power, but in fear." Then she was gone, and only the sighing of the river remained. The men stood in silence for a long while. At last, Baranor spoke. "Do you believe it was truly her?" Halion gazed at the empty shore. "I do, and if she warns of evil, we will face it." The next day they searched the ruins. Beneath the broken halls, they found a stair leading down into darkness. A vault sealed long ago. The air that drifted up was cold and foul, reeking of rot and time. Halion lit his torch. "Stay close," he said. "If there is something here, we end it." They descended into the depths, the flame casting long shadows across the damp stone. The passage wound downward, its walls carved with faded reliefs, scenes of old battles, of kings and armies, of the white tree blazing above all. At the bottom they found a vast chamber, half flooded by the river's slow seepage. In its center stood a black stone pedestal, and upon it a helm wrought of iron and gold, cracked and darkened by fire. "It is but an old relic," said one of the men, "a ruin like the rest." Halion shook his head. "No. Feel the air. It breathes still." He drew his sword. "Stand ready." Even as he spoke, the water rippled. A whisper rose, faint, chilling. Then the helm lifted from the pedestal as if drawn by invisible hands. Shadows poured from it, swirling into a shape tall and menacing. A figure without face, a memory-given form. Halion's heart clenched, but he stood firm. "By the white tree, you shall not rise again." The shadow answered with a voice that seemed to come from the stones themselves. "The light wanes, Knight of Hope. The world forgets its heroes. Then we will remind it," Halion said, and charged. The battle that followed was fierce and strange, for they fought not flesh, but darkness itself. Their swords passed through mist, and yet each stroke dimmed the shadow's form. The chamber shook, stones cracking underfoot. The men fought as one, bound by their oath and by the memory of all who had fallen. At last Halion drove his blade through the shadow's heart. There was a sound like thunder, and the darkness burst apart, fading into nothingness. The helm fell clattering upon the stone, lifeless once more. Silence returned, deep and heavy, but clean. Halion knelt, weary and breathless. "It is done," he said. Baranor sheathed his sword. "The evil is broken, but what was it?" "Only what remains when men forget hope," Halion answered softly. "A shadow of their own making." They sealed the vault once more and left Osgiliath by sunrise. The river ran golden in the morning light, and though sorrow lingered, the air was clear. As they rode back toward the White City, Halion looked eastward one last time. The mists had lifted, and for the first time in many years, the ruins stood quiet, at peace. He touched the hilt of his sword and whispered, "Your warning was not in vain, Linnell. Hope endures,
and in that moment, though unseen, a faint wind rose from the river, carrying the scent of lilies and the sound of distant song. The shadow at Osgiliath was vanquished, yet its memory clung to Halian's heart like a chill that would not fade. The men returned to Minas Tirith beneath a quiet sky, their armor dulled by battle, their spirits weighed by what they had seen. But the people of the city greeted them as heroes once more. Bells rang from the high towers, and banners fluttered bright upon the wind. Children followed their horses laughing, and women threw garlands of white blossom before them. Yet Halion could not rejoice. When the company was dismissed, he rode alone to the houses of healing and stood for a long time before the Garden of Remembrance, where the names of the fallen were carved upon marble. His gaze fell upon one name above all others, Lineal of Athelion. Someone had laid fresh flowers at the base of the stone, white and silver as starlight. He knelt there until the evening bells tolled and the light faded from the sky. That night he dreamed again of the river, of the woman robed in white, calling to him across the water. Her voice was calm, yet it carried warning. The world is not rid of shadow, Halion. It waits, not in the east, but in the hearts of men. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, his sword clutched tight in his hand. When morning came, he went to the citadel and sought audience with King Elisar. The king received him in the court of the White Tree, where the branches were heavy with new blossom. The air was still, save for the murmur of fountains. Halion bowed. "My lord, I bring tidings both grave and strange.
We have driven the remnants of the dark from Osgiliath, yet I fear that the power which stirred there was but a shadow of something greater. It moves now, unseen." Elisar regarded him with calm eyes. "I do not doubt your words, Halion. There are murmurings from the north as well, lights in the hills near the ruins of Fornost, and dreams that trouble the Dunedain. Peace is a fragile thing. Evil does not perish. It sleeps and wakes in new forms." "Then what would you have me do, my lord?" The king rose and placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Ride north. Speak with the rangers of Arnor. If there is truth to these rumors, I would know it. Take only those you trust most." So it was that within a week, Halion and 4 of his knights set forth from Minas Tirith, riding beneath the banners of no house. They crossed the green fields of Anorion, rode through the gap of Rohan, and northward, along the Anduin's silver course. The journey took many weeks. Spring faded to summer, and still they rode, past hills golden with grass and forests deep with shadow. In time the land changed. The wide plains gave way to rolling moors and lonely downs. Old stones stood upon the hills like sentinels of forgotten days. They passed through the ruins of Anuminus, the once great capital of the north, where ivy now grew upon marble and the wind sang through empty halls. At last, in the wild country of Eriador, they found the rangers, tall, silent men clad in gray and green, their eyes keen as hawks. Their leader was a grim but noble figure named Eredor, of the line of the northern Dunedain. "You come from Gondor," Eredor said when they met by the fire. "What brings the knights of the south so far from their white walls?" Halion told him of the whispering darkness, of the reawakening of shadows, and of the voice that haunted his dreams. When he had finished, Eredor was silent for a time. "There are places in this land where evil lingers," he said at last. "Old strongholds of Angmar, where the Witch King's sorcery has never wholly faded.
Lately we have seen strange fires upon the barrows near Fornost. At night the dead walk in their armor, and the air grows bitter cold. Halion's eyes darkened. Then it is there we must go. The rangers gave them guides, and together they rode into the North Downs, where the wind moaned across heather and stone. The ruins of Fornost rose before them, towers shattered, walls broken, yet proud even in ruin. Clouds drifted low over the hills, and crows wheeled in the sky. As dusk fell, they made camp among the fallen columns of an old gate. The rangers warned them not to wander after nightfall, for the land was restless. "The spirits here remember war," said Eredor quietly. "They hate the living." But Halion could not sleep. He stood watch upon the hill, gazing at the dark plain below. A faint light flickered there, pale as moonfire. He called softly to Eredor, and together they watched as the light grew, spreading until the shapes of men appeared, clad in rusted mail, their eyes burning cold. "The dead of Fornost," Eredor murmured. "They rise again." Without hesitation, Halion drew his sword. "Then let us give them rest." They descended the slope with their men torches raised. The light of the flames glimmered upon the ghostly host. The spirits turned, and a voice rang out among them, hollow and ancient. "Who disturbs the fallen kings?" Halion stepped forward. "We come in the name of the king Elisar, heir of Elendel. We seek no quarrel, only peace for these lands." The leader of the Wraiths regarded him with cold disdain. "Peace? There is no peace for us. We fell defending this land, and none remember our names?" Eredor's voice was firm. "We remember. The North does not forget its dead." But the Wraiths advanced, their ghostly blades gleaming. "Then join us, living men, and remember forever." The battle that followed was one of terror and wonder. Steel rang upon shadows, and the torches flared with unnatural wind. The Wraiths struck without mercy, their weapons cold as winter. Many times Halion felt their touch like ice upon his flesh. Yet the knights of Gondor stood firm, their courage shining like fire amid the darkness. Halion fought at the forefront, calling upon the names of Gondor and Arnor. His sword blazed with pale light, as if the white tree itself lent him strength. One by one, the spirits fell back, their forms breaking apart like mist. Then the last of them spoke, its voice a fading whisper. "Our watch is ended, but beware, Knight of Hope. Not all shadows are born of evil. Some rise from sorrow, unhealed." The Wraiths vanished, and silence returned to the ruins. The air grew still and warm again. When dawn broke, Eredor clasped Halion's arm. "You have done a deed worthy of song. The North owes you a debt." Halion smiled faintly. "We owe each other hope, nothing more." That night, as they camped beside a stream in the quiet hills, Halion looked up at the stars, bright and countless above the empty lands. He thought of Linnæal's words, of the promise he had made, and of the battles still to come. The wind stirred the grass, whispering through the stones of old kingdoms. Though the world was scarred and weary, he felt the pulse of life within it still, strong, enduring, and unbroken. And beneath those ancient stars, Sir Halion of Gondor swore silently to guard that light until his strength failed, for he knew now that the power of hope was not in victory, but in never yielding to despair. The long ride south from the northern hills took many weeks, and when at last Halion and his company reached the lands of Gondor once more, autumn had begun to fade into the pale stillness of winter. The trees of Ithilien were turning gold and bronze, and mist lay like a veil across the fields of the Pelennor.
To the people of Minas Tirith, their return was cause for rejoicing, for word had reached the city of the peace restored in the North Downs, and songs had already begun to be sung of the battle among the barrows. But Halion accepted no honors, nor sought the comfort of the feasts prepared in their name. He rode instead through the city's quiet streets to the houses of healing, and stood for a time in the gardens where the air was sweet with herbs. There he lingered beside a white-flowered tree that had been planted in memory of Linnea. He laid his hand upon the slender trunk and closed his eyes. "We have done as we swore," he murmured, "and the shadows sleep again. Yet still I feel them move in the deep places of the world. I do not think the age of peace will last." From behind him came a soft voice. "You speak as one who has seen too much darkness to trust the dawn." He turned, and before him stood Queen Arwen Undomiel, robed in gray-blue and crowned with silver. Her eyes, deep and bright as starlit waters, regarded him with a gentleness that stilled his thoughts. "My lady," Halion said, bowing deeply, "I did not know you walked here." "I walk here often," she answered. "It is a place of quiet remembrance, and I know your heart is troubled." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the tree. "Hope is a burden, Sir Halion, not a gift. To carry it when all seems lost, that is its true weight." Her words stirred something in him, the echo of an old lesson. "Then perhaps I carry it poorly," he said. "Everywhere I turn, I see only the shadow's traces." "The shadow will always linger," said Arwen. "But remember this, even the darkness cannot touch a heart that refuses it." Linnea understood that truth. It is why her light endures. Her voice faded into silence. The garden's fountains murmured softly, and the air was cool. At last, Halion bowed again. "You give me comfort, my queen. If hope is indeed a burden, then I will bear it gladly until the end." "That is all any of us can do," she said, and she smiled faintly. Then she turned and was gone, her footsteps light upon the stone paths, leaving behind a hush that seemed full of music. The days that followed were peaceful upon the surface, but beneath the calm the realm stirred with new unease. Messengers came to Minas Tirith, bearing tidings from the southern fiefs. Strange storms had swept the coasts of Belfalas and Anfalas, driving ships upon the rocks. Fishermen spoke of shapes moving beneath the sea, shadows vast and formless, and voices heard in the wind that called in forgotten tongues. King Elisar gathered his council in the tower hall. Halion stood among the captains, listening as the reports grew more dire. One spoke of a beacon on the Isle of Tolfalas that had burned with unnatural blue flame. Another told of men vanishing along the shore, their footprints leading down to the water and ending there. At last the king turned to Halion. "You have looked upon the face of the shadow more than any here. What think you of these signs?" Halion was silent for a moment. "My lord, evil once bound to the east now seeks other routes. If the mountains and the graves no longer serve it, perhaps it has turned to the sea." Elisar's gaze darkened. "There are tales from elder days of spirits banished into the deeps, bound there by the valor. If such things stir again, it is no small peril. I will not send an army upon rumor, but I will have eyes upon the coast." He looked upon Halion then, and a spark of understanding passed between them. "Will you go once more, Knight of Hope?" "I will," said Halion simply. Within 3 days, he and a small company rode west, following the long road that wound through the vales of Lebanon
to the shores of the Bay of Belfalas. Winter clouds gathered over the sea, heavy and gray, and the air smelled of salt and rain. The coastal towns were quiet, their people fearful and watchful. In Dol Amroth, they were welcomed by Prince Elfir, son of Imrahil, who led them to the fortress overlooking the harbor. "The storms come without warning," said the prince, standing beside Helion upon the battlements. "They rise from calm seas and vanish as swiftly. My sailors swear they have seen shapes in the waves like arms or coils of darkness. Some have heard singing beneath the water, cold, sorrowful singing." "That is no storm song," Helion said. "Something ancient moves beneath the tide." That night he walked the seawall alone. The moon hung low, veiled in cloud, and the surf broke white upon the rocks. For a time there was only the sigh of the wind and the cry of distant gulls. Then, faintly, he heard it, a voice, soft and hollow, rising from the deep. It was not speech, but lament, a song of mourning that filled the heart with strange sorrow. He felt tears upon his face and could not say why. The sea glimmered faintly, and shapes seemed to stir below, vast and slow, like shadows beneath glass. Halion drew his sword, its edge catching the moonlight. "Show yourself," he said into the wind. "If evil hides beneath these waters, it shall not be left to fester." The sea answered with silence, and then a wave rose, higher than any natural tide, crashing against the wall in a spray of cold foam. He was thrown backward, struggling for balance. From the heart of the surf a light glimmered, pale, shifting, and deep as the abyss. A voice came then, neither man's nor woman's. "Foolish child of stone and air, you fight shadows, yet you do not see the true peril. The world is changing and the sea remembers." Halion stood his ground, though the wind howled around him. "If you are a servant of the dark, I will cast you down, as I have others." The voice sighed, almost with pity. "You cannot cast down the sea, Knight of Hope, but beware, not all who drown are lost. Some wake below, and they will come again." The light faded, the waters fell still, and the night grew quiet once more. Halion lowered his sword, breathing hard. He did not sleep until dawn. When morning came, he told Elfir all that he had seen, but the prince's face was grave. "My father spoke once of such things. The ancient spirits of the deeps, bound there since the breaking of the world. If they stir, their wrath could drown us all." "Then we must seek counsel," said Halion. "Perhaps the wisdom of the elves can shed light upon this." And so, leaving a garrison at Dol Amroth, he took ship northward to the havens of Edhelland, where the sea still whispered of the elder days. There upon the quiet shore, where few mortals now walked, he found what he sought, a figure robed in white, tall and fair, whose hair shone like silver in the morning sun. The elf greeted him with a knowing smile. "You have come far, son of Gondor. The sea speaks to you, does it not?" Halion bowed low. "It speaks of sorrow, my lord, and of things that should have perished." "Then listen well," said the elf, "for what you have heard is not yet evil, but the echo of grief. The sea keeps memory, and the memory of the world is long. But if men forget their oaths, that sorrow may turn to wrath. Guard the shores well, Knight of Hope, for storms greater than these will come." And Halion, gazing out upon the endless gray waves, felt once more the weight of the promise he had made, to bear hope into every shadow, no matter how deep. The words of the elf lingered long in Halion's mind as he journeyed eastward again. The winter storms passed, but their memory hung over Gondor like a veil. In Dol Amroth, sailors whispered that the sea sang still, a mournful song that carried on nights when the moon was hidden. In the taverns of Pelargir, men spoke of ghostly sails glimpsed upon the horizon, pale and silent as the grave. Halion carried these tidings to Minas Tirith, but when he stood again before King Elisar, the king's brow was troubled. "The world heals, yet its scars remain," said Elisar. "We cannot fight the sea, Halion, nor chain the wind. If these stirrings are born of sorrow, we must answer them with remembrance, not war." So the king sent forth his heralds to the coastal towns, bidding the people honor the sea with lights and song, not fear. Lanterns were set upon the waves at midsummer, and choirs sang upon the cliffs of Belfalas, hymns to the valor and the undying lands beyond the west. For a time the waters grew calm again, and the people rejoiced. But Halion's heart was restless. In his dreams he saw the deep again. Vast halls beneath the waves lit by pale fire, and a shadow moving among them like smoke. A voice whispered, "The sea keeps memory, and it remembers the pride of men." He would wake in the darkness, hand upon his sword, his breath ragged as though from battle. Then came tidings from the north. Villages along the Morthond Vale had vanished, their fields left untended, their hearths cold. At first, the people thought it the work of bandits, but travelers began to speak of mists rising from the river at night, mists that glowed faintly and bore voices within them. Halion rode out once more, taking with him 4 of his knights and a company of rangers, lent by Faramir. They followed the course of the Morthond through barren hills and silent woods until they came to the edge of the vale. The sky hung low and gray, and the air smelled of rain and stone. They found the first village empty. Doors hung open, food still upon the tables, fires long dead. There were no bodies, only silence. The second village was the same. In the third they found tracks, barefoot, many together, leading down toward the river. "They walked willingly," said one of the rangers, kneeling to study the prints. "No struggle, no flight. It is as though they were called." That night Halion kept watch by the water's edge. The moon was thin and red, its reflection trembling upon the current. The forest behind him was quiet, the men asleep beside their fire. Near midnight, a mist began to rise. It crept low along the ground, swirling like breath, and from within came the faint sound of voices, soft, distant, like the murmuring of a great crowd. Halion rose, sword in hand. "Who goes there?" he called. The mist thickened, and the voices grew clearer. Shapes formed within it, men and women pale as moonlight, their faces sorrowful and still. Among them moved children, their eyes empty. They walked slowly toward the river, their feet leaving no mark upon the earth. Halion stepped forward, the torchlight flickering against his armor. "Halt! By the white tree and the throne of Gondor, I command you, speak!" One figure turned. A woman's shade, her hair long and drifting like smoke. Her voice was a whisper carried by the mist. "We seek our home. The sea calls us." "You are not of the sea," Halion said. "You are bound to the earth and to memory. Who calls you forth?" The woman lifted her hand, pointing toward the dark hills beyond the river. "He waits," she said. "The one who remembers the forgotten." Before he could ask more, the mist began to draw away, the figures dissolving into the night. The air grew cold as iron, and the river surged. Halion turned to rouse his men, but A shape was already rising from the water, tall and hooded, its form woven from shadow and spray. "I have waited long," the voice said, deep as the depths below. "Long have I lingered in the places men have forsaken. You would bring peace to the restless dead, then give them what was denied, remembrance." Hallian's heart hammered in his chest. "Who are you?" "I am no servant of the Dark Lord," the figure answered. "I am the grief of those forgotten, the sorrow of kings whose tombs are broken, the cry of widows whose names are lost to time. I am the keeper of shadows." The river's surface shuddered, and faces seemed to rise within it. Men, women, soldiers, in tattered mail. Their eyes glowed faintly, neither cruel nor kind, only weary. Hallian stood firm. "You have no place among the living." The keeper's voice deepened. "Then remember us, Knight of Gondor. Speak our names, or we will wander forever." The mist surged forward, wrapping around the camp. Men awoke, shouting, blades flashing in the ghostly light, the air filled with whispers, the touch of cold hands, the echo of ancient grief. Hallian's torch sputtered and went out. He could see nothing but the faint glimmer of his sword. "Hold fast," he cried. "They are memory, not flesh. Stand with me." He began to speak aloud the names of the fallen, his comrades from Ithilien, Dareth, Lineal, and all those who had perished for Gondor. His voice trembled, but as he spoke, the mist faltered, drawing back. The shadows paused, their forms wavering. "Their names are not lost," he said. "They live in the hearts of those who remain. Be gone and be at peace." The keeper gave a sound like a sigh, vast and deep. "You have remembered, and so we rest." The mist thinned, rising into the night sky and fading like smoke. When dawn came, the river ran clear again, and the air was sweet with dew. The villages lay still, but in one of them they found writing upon the wall of an old hall. Words traced in ash. "Hope endures where memory is kept." Hallian read the words and bowed his head. "So even sorrow may yield to hope," he said. When he returned to Minas Tirith, the king listened in silence to his tale. "You have done what no sword could do," said Elisar. "You have given peace to the forgotten. That is a greater victory than any won in battle." Hallian bowed. "Then may their rest endure, my lord." That night, as the city slept, he climbed once more to the high walls of the citadel. The stars shone bright above the mountains, and far below, the Anduin gleamed like silver. He felt the wind upon his face and thought he heard the faintest echo of a song carried upon it. Not of grief this time, but of quiet joy. And he knew that those shadows would rise again in years to come. The light would never wholly fade, for hope, once kindled, burns beyond death and beyond time. Winter deepened across the White City, laying a quiet hush over Gondor. The peaks of Mindolluin gleamed with snow, and the white trees stood like a beacon of frost beneath the clear stars. Within the citadel, fires burned bright, yet even in their warmth, Hallian felt the touch of cold that came not from weather but from memory. Though months had passed since the events at Morthen Vale, he could not forget the voice that had spoken from the mist. "I am the grief of those forgotten." He had faced darkness in many forms, fire and shadow, pride and despair. But this was different. The shadow that haunted Gondor now was not of malice, but of sorrow unhealed. The ache of ages, of wounds left unremembered. And yet even sorrow could turn to peril if left to fester. King Elisar called for a great gathering of captains and lore masters in the tower hall to speak of these things. The torches burned high upon the black marble walls, and the banners of the reunited kingdom hung motionless in the still air. Beside the throne stood Queen Arwen, her presence serene and watchful. "The tides of the world are shifting," said Elisar, his voice grave. "The lands of men prosper, but old powers stir again, not in hatred, but in longing. It is not war they bring, but unrest, the echo of the world's sorrow." Halion bowed. "Then we must answer sorrow with remembrance, as we did at Morthon. Hope fades when memory fails." The king nodded slowly. "Wise words, Sir Halion. You have walked long roads and seen much, yet the weight of these matters is not yours alone. The realm must learn again what it means to honor the past. I will send heralds to every province, from Lossarnach to Anfalas, to restore the tombs and the halls of the forgotten. The dead will be remembered and their peace renewed." When the council ended, Arwen spoke softly to Halion as they walked together through the colonnade. The sun set red beyond the mountains, casting long shadows across the courtyard. "There is one place yet where remembrance lies broken," she said, "beyond the mountains of shadow and the ruins of Minas Morgul. Its light was turned to darkness and its name cursed. But even that place once held beauty in the days when it was Minas Ithil, Tower of the Moon. Perhaps if hope is to endure, it must shine even there." Halion met her gaze, the wind stirring his dark hair. "You would have me go there, my queen?" "I would ask it if you have the heart," she said, "not to cleanse it by force, but to bear light into its depths, a single flame to wake the memory of what it was." He bowed deeply. "Then I shall go." Thus it was that before winter's end, Halion gathered a small fellowship, 10 knights of Gondor, chosen from the bravest of his company, and set out once more toward the Ephel Duath. They rode first through Ithilien, where green life had begun to reclaim the wild woods. Birds flitted among the branches and deer moved softly through the glades. But as they drew nearer to the mountains, the air grew chill and still, and the light dimmed. After many days, they reached the valley of Morgul Vale. There the land lay wounded, gray and lifeless, though a faint mist still clung to the stream that ran from the tower's ruins. Nothing stirred, no birds, no beasts, only the whisper of the wind among the stones. The tower itself stood broken, its spire shattered, its gates long fallen. Yet even in ruin, it seemed to breathe, as though the stones themselves remembered pain. Faint traces of green light glimmered within its hollow halls like the ghosts of old enchantments. Halion dismounted, his boots crunching upon the ash-strewn ground. "This was once a place of beauty," he said quietly. "Now it is a tomb." They entered the outer court, their torches burning low in the still air. Strange carvings marked the walls, faces twisted in anguish, runes half faded by time. The men walked in silence, wary but resolute. In the heart of the tower they found a great hall, roofless now, where moonlight fell pale upon the stones. There, upon a dais, stood a broken throne. The remains of banners hung above it, torn, scorched, but faintly white beneath the dust. Halion stepped forward and laid his hand upon the cold marble of the throne. "Once this was the seat of Isildur's house," he murmured, "and though evil claimed it, its memory remains. Let that memory awaken." He drew his sword and raised it high. The moonlight caught the steel, and it gleamed pure and silver, casting long shadows through the hall. "By the grace of the West," he said, his voice clear, "let this place be remembered for what it was. not a tower of fear, but of light. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a soft wind stirred, sweeping through the ruins. The torches flared brighter, and the green glow faded. A pale radiance spread slowly along the stones, gentle as dawn. The carvings seemed to smooth, their twisted faces easing into calm. The men fell to their knees, awestruck. One whispered, "The shadow lifts." Hallion lowered his sword, his heart swelling with both grief and wonder. The tower was still broken, yet it no longer seemed cursed. It stood silent and empty, but at peace. As they turned to depart, a faint voice reached Hallion's ear, like the echo of a memory. "Hope endures, even in ruin." He paused, looking back once more. "Then rest, Tower of the Moon," he said softly. "Your light is not forgotten." The company rode back through the vale, the cold air now touched with the faint scent of spring. When they reached the green lands of Ithilien again, birds sang in the trees as though rejoicing at their passing. Upon their return to Minas Tirith, word of the tower's cleansing spread swiftly. The king ordered that no fortress be raised there again, but that it remain as it stood, a monument to endurance. "Let the Tower of the Moon stand as a reminder," Elisar proclaimed, "that even the darkest place may one day remember light." That night, as stars kindled over the white city, Hallion stood once more beside the white tree. Snow still lay upon its roots, but new buds had begun to show among its branches, glimmering faintly in the starlight. He thought of the long road behind him, of friends lost and found, of shadows faced and light restored. Queen Arwen came quietly beside him. "You have done all that could be asked," she said. "The world is changed, yet you have kept its heart whole." Hallion bowed his head. "It is not mine, my lady. It belongs to all who still believe that even in ruin, something fair may grow." She smiled. "Then may that belief never fade." As she left, Hallion lifted his gaze to the stars, bright and cold above the mountains. He felt the stir of the wind from the east, gentle and clean, and in it he seemed to hear again the voices of those who had gone before, Lineal, Dareth, the Knights of Hope who had fallen. They did not speak, but their silence was full of peace. And so Hallion stood long beneath the white tree, the city quiet around him, and knew that while the world would always bear its share of sorrow, its light, the light of Gondor, of hope, of memory, would never be extinguished. Spring came at last to Gondor, bright and slow, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath after long remembrance. The snows melted upon the shoulders of Mindalluin, and the Anduin ran full and silver, glinting beneath the sun. The white tree of the king stood in blossom, its branches heavy with white and gold. And though the scars of war and shadow remained across the land, peace, long desired and hard won, now truly held sway. Yet for Sir Hallion, Knight of Hope, peace was never stillness. He walked often among the people, from the high circles of Minas Tirith to the green vales of Lossarnac, speaking with farmers, builders, and soldiers alike. To some he was a hero, to others a quiet watcher who bore the memory of darker days. He asked little for himself and carried always the same sword, the blade that had shone in fire and shadow, now dulled with time but unbroken. One morning, as the mists of dawn still veiled the city, he was summoned to the king's private court. Elisar awaited him there alone, standing before the tall window that looked east toward the mountains. His cloak was of white and silver, and upon his brow the crown glimmered faintly in the pale light. "You sent word, my lord," Halion said, bowing low. "I did," said Elisar, turning. "For though the realm thrives, I feel unrest beyond our borders. My heart tells me that the world is changing again, not toward war, but toward an age where the memory of the old shall fade, and I fear what might be lost with it." Halion's gaze followed the king's out the window. "Time is a river, my lord. None can hold its flow, but memory is a light. It may dim, yet if tended, it will not die." The king smiled faintly. "You speak with wisdom born of pain, my friend. It is for this reason I have called you. The realm needs more than strength of arms. It needs guardians of remembrance, men who will walk its borders and keep alive the knowledge of what was won and what was lost. I would have you lead them." Halion bowed deeply. "Then I will go where memory fades and kindle its fire again." So was founded the Order of the White Flame, a company of knights sworn not only to defend the reunited kingdom but to preserve its spirit. They carried no banners save a single torch, wrought in silver upon their shields, and their oath was simple: to remember, to guard, and to hope. Their first charge was to ride once more through the lands that had known shadow. Halion led them across Ithilien, where the ruins of old fortresses stood silent beneath new growth. They rode north to Osgiliath, where grass now grew among the stones, and children played upon the river banks, where once armies had clashed. In the moonlight, the old domes gleamed like ghostly crowns upon the water, but no longer in sorrow. One evening they camped beside the river, where Liniel had once appeared to Halion in spirit. As the fire crackled and the men slept, Halion sat apart, gazing at the reflection of the stars. A soft breeze rippled the surface, and he thought he heard a faint voice, distant but clear, like a memory carried upon the wind. "You have done well, Halion," it seemed to say. "The darkness has lessened. The light grows where hope is sown." He did not answer aloud, but bowed his head, and the river glimmered as if with laughter. When he raised his eyes, the night was still and quiet, and peace lay upon him like a mantle. In the months that followed, the Knights of the White Flame became known throughout the realm. They restored broken bridges, rebuilt watchtowers, and cleared old roads of ruin. Wherever they went, they brought not only safety, but remembrance, carving upon stone the names of those who had fallen, telling tales of courage and mercy, of the fellowship and the king, of hope unyielding. One day, as Halion's company rode through the green fields of Lebanon, a child ran beside their horses, calling out, "Are you the knights who fight the darkness?" Halion reined in and smiled down at her. "No, little one, we are the knights who keep the light alive." She laughed, bright and unafraid, and ran back toward her village. Watching her go, Halion felt a warmth stir within him, the quiet certainty that the world was healing. In time the order grew, and new generations took the oath. Many years passed, and the realm flourished. Yet Halion did not rest. Though his hair grew silver and his steps slowed, he continued to ride the borders of Gondor, bearing his torch upon his shield. The people came to call him Halion the Enduring, for wherever he went, hope seemed to follow. At last, when age had laid its gentle hand upon him, he returned to Minas Tirith one final time. The king's son now ruled the realm, but the White City stood as bright as ever, its towers rising proud against the sky. The white tree still blossomed in the courtyard, its petals drifting like snow upon the wind. Halion climbed the long stair to the court of the tree and stood there alone. The air was cool and the sound of the fountains filled the silence. He rested his hands upon the hilt of his sword, worn and weathered, and looked out across the lands of Gondor, fair and free as he had always dreamed they might be. Ithilien restored, Osgiliath reborn, the Tower of the Moon at peace, he murmured. The world turns again, but its light remains. Then he felt the weight of years ease from his shoulders. He knelt before the tree and closed his eyes, whispering, "My watch is ended. The flame endures." When dawn came, the guards found him there, still and calm, his sword laid across his knees, and a faint smile upon his face. The petals of the white tree had fallen around him like snow, and the first light of morning gilded his armor in gold. He was buried upon the high hill overlooking the Anduin, beside the heroes of old. Upon his tomb were carved simple words. "Here lies Halion of Gondor, Knight of the White Flame. He bore hope into darkness, and the light did not fail." Years turned to centuries, and kingdoms rose and faded, but the tale of the Knights of Hope endured in song and story. Travelers who came to Minas Tirith spoke still of the old knight who had walked in shadow and found peace. And when storms swept the land or sorrow touched the hearts of men, they would lift their eyes to the white tree and remember that even in the darkest hour, hope, once kindled, burns beyond all darkness. So ended the tale of the Knights of Gondor, not in despair nor in triumph alone, but in the quiet strength that comes when courage and memory walk hand in hand. And though the ages would change and the world move on into new light, the power of hope, that gentle flame that began in the hearts of the few, would live forever in the hearts of the many.